Hey guys, just a quick little note before we start the show here. I inadvertently refer to the Executive Assistant line of books, that's Executive Assistant Iris and its companion series, Executive Assistant Assassins, as Extreme Assistants sometimes in this. My bad. Sorry. Okay, on with the show. Previously, when we reviewed the Aspen Comics publication Extreme Assistant Assassins, we actually wound up shooting an episode of the Random Trade Review in this room for the very first time because my original recliner broke. Since then, I am now on recliner number 4, which is also broken and no longer reclines, forcing me to have to use an ottoman. Except, of course, when I'm shooting this show because I constantly have to get up to turn the camera on and off a bunch of times. What were we talking about again? Oh, yeah, right. Aspen Comics. They launched their first ongoing series, Executive Assistant Assassins, that followed a group of women with floral code names who were expertly trained as hitwomen slash special business assistants slash courtesans to high-rolling business tycoons. The series followed a group of executive assistants teaming together to take down a common foe at considerable cost. After that, we began to delve into the origins of the Executive Assistant Academy in China by basically following the same story told multiple times. A young woman would fall in love with a guy she really wasn't supposed to, who would wind up bringing her to the academy. She would get a lot of training, but eventually wind up killing her lover because, I don't know, she read it on the back of a cereal box or something. If you couldn't tell already, I really did not like Executive Assistant Assassins. Mainly because of the aforementioned repetitiveness, not to mention Aspen Comics' standard over-reliance on Cheesecake art. In other words, very pretty girls slinking around in very little clothing. There were several shots in the series that just made me wonder if they wanted to do porn so badly, why not just do porn? And if you think I'm banging too much on Aspen Comics here, I would point out that I have also reviewed 2 other publications on this show since then, with Trish Otterwater and Shrugged, giving pretty favorable reviews to both, so I know they're capable of doing better. Now, while Executive Assistant Assassins was an ongoing series, it was actually preceded by a group of miniseries following an assistant named Iris. Iris had 3 miniseries, with the final one beginning to overlap with Executive Assistant Assassins. Today, we're looking at a massive compilation of these 3 miniseries. This is the Executive Assistant Iris Omnibus Volume 1. The head of the Ching Corporation finds himself in a heated negotiation with one of the heads of Gazprom over an oil pipeline in Belarus. Ching makes several generous offers to the Gazprom rep named Krylov, but all are rejected, citing interference from the Belarusian government. So Mr. Ching is forced to take more drastic measures. A few nights later, Iris, the personal assistant to Mr. Ching, makes her way to the Krylov home. She begins mowing through security, including a guard who knows about her background. It's then that Krylov hears some noises coming from his daughter Sophie's bedroom. He enters to the sight of blood on the little girl's head. Thankfully, the little girl is not dead, but the message has been sent loud and clear. Krylov caves and makes the deal with Ching the next day. You know, the funny thing is, Gazprom actually is a Russian utility company that's worth over $80.5 billion and serves much of the power supply to Central and Eastern Europe. And yes, I am mainly aware of them because I've watched a lot of the UEFA Champions League. Iris and Mr. Ching then move on to Kabul, Afghanistan. For some stupid reason, the Afghan business leader named Saffron decides to take Ching hostage and hold him for ransom. Iris proceeds to kill most of Saffron's guards, and he yields. Back at the company's Los Angeles headquarters, a board member named Alan Chu begins leading some voices of concern over the company's recent activities. It's not so much over Iris's actions, as those have been kept under wraps. However, they have been getting stuck up in some rather dodgy deals. As this plays out, Iris finds herself a bit more occupied from the overtures of Dennis Rucker, a junior board member who has some romantic inclinations towards her. Despite rules forbidding inter-office dating, Ching actually encourages Iris to go out with Dennis and see how valuable an asset he can truly be. But first things first, they need to deal with Mr. Chu. Iris tracks Chu down to his hotel in Century City, where he's with his wife and daughter, with a planned trip to Disneyland for the next day. This means that certain measures will have to be taken to avoid collateral damage.
Odd, given the fact that Iris had no qualms about threatening that Russian guy's little girl.
Iris manages to reserve the hotel room above the one the Chu family is using. She then hooks up a long snake-like device similar to that a plumber would use to work through the ventilation system and drop some poison into Chu's mouth. This results in him suffering symptoms similar to a heart attack, and he is soon dead. However, the events begin to sit with Iris, even as Dennis treats her to the finest mini-golf that money can buy. It gets further exasperated at Alan Chu's funeral when his daughter, Lily, recognizes Iris from the hotel elevator. However, the finger-pointing is just chalked up to traumatic shock over everything that's happened.
So what exactly is the assistant part of Iris's job with Mr. Ching? Well, she basically kind of acts like a personal secretary, arranging business appointments, meetings, and the like, and she also routinely serves him tea, because Asian. And also, yeah, she does occasionally have sex with him.
Mr. Ching is called in by several of his business partners, or to put it more simply, members of the organized crime families whose money he launders. They are disappointed by the recent earnings and are demanding a larger cut. Ching tries to give some BS spiel about numbers, but they respond with attack ninjas. Iris fights off the attackers, only to suddenly find that someone has set them up the bomb. Iris and Ching manage to survive the explosion by hiding in an escape hatch beneath the floorboards. Obviously, Ching soon dispatches Iris to take out those who tried to kill him. First, it's off to Monte Carlo to take down an associate named Victor Huang.
Huang actually lives full-time in a yacht in international waters to avoid being arrested, but I guess even he can't resist the full allure of the craps tables in Monte Carlo.
Iris manages to win a few hands at the roulette wheel, which attracts the attention of one of Huang's underlings. He leads her to the beach, where he tries to be romantic and point out where Huang's yacht is, but she just winds up smothering him in the dirt. Iris puts on some scuba gear to try to make her way to the yacht and take out several of the guards. However, all of this changes when it turns out that Huang has an executive assistant of his own.
This is Rose, a longtime rival of Iris who goes on to become her most frequent opponent.
Rose points out that even if Iris kills Victor Huang, the other crime bosses won't stop until Ching is dead, so maybe it's in her best interest to just join up instead. Iris responds by running Rose through with a sword, causing her to plunge through a skylight. This causes Victor Huang to step out and barter for his life, which turns out to be rather pointless as Iris soon breaks his neck. Once more, though, a family member's mood begins to haunt Iris as Huang's wife steps out and yells at her to just leave the yacht. During some downtime, Iris begins to grow closer to Dennis, and when Ching orders her to just end the relationship and focus on the main goal, she chooses to defy her employer and meet with Dennis's mother and spend the weekend with him later. Eventually, though, duty does call, and Iris is sent to the Shinjuku district of Japan to track down their next target, Takeo. Takeo makes his money in underground gambling, and Iris visits one of his casinos under the guise of applying for a card dealer job. However, a wrench gets thrown into Iris's plans when she's marked by Lily, another former member of the Academy.
Now, while Lily does technically work for Takeo, she is not an executive assistant, as she failed to graduate the Academy after Iris broke her leg in a sparring battle.
Iris appears to get by Lily unnoticed and makes her way through to Takeo. However, he soon reveals the truth as Lily has tipped him off. Iris begins kicking herself for slipping up so bad as she tries to fend off several of Takeo's bodyguards. Soon, though, she manages to make way back into the room with Takeo, only to find that Lily has already killed him before mysteriously disappearing. However, this isn't necessarily good for Iris, as she's now stuck in this weird mood and it's beginning to affect her job performance as she begins fumbling around and spilling Ching's daily afternoon tea. She goes back to Dennis to blow off some steam, not knowing that Ching has actually been surveilling her the whole time. It's then that Lily somehow gets back in contact with Iris. The fact is, a lot of past trauma has been popping up with the executive assistants. In the case of Iris, it was seeing a friend who failed to graduate named Violet and several others being sold into the sex trafficking trade. Feeling that it's time for the Academy to come down, the executive assistants gather in the Wuhan province of China, where the Academy's new headquarters are located. Lily leads a distraction for security as Iris and several others work their way through the background. Of course, there are executive assistants who are loyal to the Academy as well, and they are in the way. Still, Iris manages to locate the head of the Academy, take out his last two assistants before leaving him to Lily and the others. However, upon returning to Los Angeles, Ching confronts Iris with evidence that Dennis has been talking with the FBI. She confronts Dennis, who says that the feds did contact him but he didn't say anything. He even goes far as to pull out a ring and explains that he loves Iris and is willing to keep tight-lipped as the only way to stay with her. Sadly, that's where the joy soon comes to an end. When Iris wakes up in the middle of the night to take care of some business, a silenced gunshot goes off, killing Dennis in his sleep. Cheng's forces soon come crashing in, and Iris spots the shooter hopping on a motorcycle and speeding away. Iris manages to break free and gives pursuit in Dennis's car. However, it turns out someone has snapped the brake line, and soon the car goes careening over the side of a cliff.
So who exactly is the killer? Well, I don't really know. It doesn't really seem to get revealed, or at least not in this volume. I mean, I'm guessing the most likely candidate would be Rose, given her frequent appearances.
Back in his office, Cheng burns any evidence of Iris and prepares to go looking for a new executive assistant. However, news reports begin to point out that no body was recovered. As it turns out, Iris dove out of the car at the last second. It doesn't really matter, though, as Cheng is on his way to Dubai, which is home to the new headquarters of the Executive Assistant Academy that he's just founded. Iris uses Lily to get passage to the Middle East, and soon she's at the roof of Cheng's hotel, where she's jumped by 3 executive assistants. She lures the 3 into a construction zone and begins taking them out with a swinging crane. Finally, Iris makes her way to Cheng, who really isn't that surprised, as Iris was a great assistant, and, well, really the whole Dennis Rucker fiasco was his fault. However, his new academies will start to breed more loyal executive assistants. Iris runs Cheng through with her sword, but it turns out that he had help that has soon entered the room.
So who is this mysterious benefactor who just walked into the room? Who is responsible for the cliffhanger? This actually marks the end of the first Executive Assistant Iris miniseries. And we're moving right on into the next one, and, well, we're not actually going to be following Iris that much.
Diane Coverdale has taken over the company of her late husband Daniel. Though the marriage was on the rocks due to a litany of affairs on both ends, Diane is determined to run the company despite the board of directors wanting to sell it. Unfortunately, that has made her a real target. In desperate need of better security, Diane elects to use the Executive Assistant Academy and heads to Dubai, where the academy there is still open. After witnessing a demonstration of several fighters, one named Actia catches Diane's eye and a deal is struck with the 2 headed back to Los Angeles. For the first few weeks, things go smoothly. Actia even breaks up an attempt on Diane's life as she's out with Hollywood boy toy Vic Peterson. And one day, Actia takes out a paparazzi chopper, which doesn't make things look good, and once more the board of directors pressures Diane to sell to no end. Later that night, something triggers a security alarm on the Coverdale estate, and when Actia goes to investigate, she's knocked unconscious by Iris and Rose?
So you would think that this is the point where we would switch character perspectives over to Iris, right? Nope.
Actia wakes up in the hospital room with a small pain in the back of her neck. She gets up and tries to figure out where she is by wandering around the halls with her butt hanging out of her hospital gown.
Again, if you wanted to do porn so badly, why not just do porn?
Actia soon runs into a sunbathing Iris and Rose. It turns out they're being held on the island of Maldives by a mysterious benefactor. The 2 proceed to invite Actia to dinner along with another executive assistant named Juniper, where they promise their employer will explain everything. The man in question, named Duncan Vallone, is a businessman who wishes to control the world by controlling all business, and right now he has his sights set on Diane Coverdale's company. Actia not so politely turns down Vallone's offer, and in a rather surprising move, he elects to just let her return to Los Angeles. Upon her return, Actia tries to explain things to Diane, but they need to get to a meeting. The members of the board are looking to sell their shares to none other than Duncan Vallone. However, Diane still won't approve the sale, seeing it as the power play that it is. To show that everything is on the up and up, and in no possible way lead Diane into a trap, Duncan invites her to dinner in Las Vegas. Once they sit down in his hotel room, Duncan begins making some vague threats before finally admitting that he was actually behind the death of Diane's husband, Daniel. It turns out that Vallone had provided the startup money for Daniel's company, and now he was looking for payback in some way, shape, or form. Vallone then orders Actia to kill Diane, which she does, thanks to the control trip in the back of her neck. Vallone then orders Iris to kill Actia via decapitation.
Well, we finally reached the point where this Executive Assistant Iris miniseries finally switches character perspective over to Iris.
However, something has happened when Iris killed Actia. Her control trip started shorting out, and she's now gotten wise to Vallone's schemes. She tries to keep low as he assumes control of the Coverdale company. Unfortunately, it's not enough, as he notices her looking distant at the press conference, not to mention he notices when she slips away to talk to another former executive assistant named Orchid. Still, though, Iris is put on a mission with Rose and Juniper as they are sent to take out the head of the Felcham company in India. The trio make their way through the facility, planting C4 explosives along the way. However, Iris begins to suspect that something is up when they enter the main chemical dispensary hall, so she attacks Rose and Juniper. Just as Iris manages to gain the upper hand, Rose yells out for her to stop, and she does so. It turns out Valone modified Rose's control chip to be able to take over Iris's if need be. Rose orders Iris to stay behind and make sure everything goes off after activating the timer on all the bombs. Rose and Juniper then leave Iris to get blown up.
One could surmise that Valone is the one who walked in on Iris at the end of her initial miniseries, although it could also have been Rose given the fact that she clearly recognized the individual, but it's never exactly explained how it is that Iris came into Valone's employ.
Of course, Iris was hip to this in advance and managed to get backup in the form of Orchid and another unnamed executive assistant. The two knock out the hypnotized Iris and pull her into an escape tunnel as the explosion goes off. The two also enlist Lily's help as they take Iris back to a facility where the chip in her neck is modified so it's able to actually control Rose's chip, hopefully. The group then sets out to take down Valone's compound on the island of Maldives. The group manages to dodge their way through several booby traps only to wind up getting captured anyway. Iris is brought before Valone, who takes Rose for task for not making sure that Iris was dead in a more reliable way, like slitting her throat. To make Rose understand the penalty for failure, Valone orders Juniper killed. He now intends for Rose to get an extra chip put in her to control her the same way he does Iris. Iris, noticing that Rose views Juniper's killing as dirty pool, begins using her control chip on Rose. She gets her to free her, and then the two begin working together to free the others. The group then begins making their way to Valone, taking out two other executive assistants named Snapdragon and Wisteria along the way. In the control room, Valone reveals that he's not really in charge, and those who will come out soon enough. Rose draws a knife on Valone, and despite Iris's pleas, runs him through. She reveals that she actually disabled her control chip a long time ago, and was just playing along again because Valone's killing of Juniper was a dirty move. Valone's death, though, provides little comfort, as now the executive assistants know that they have bigger fish to deal with.
The events of the final Executive Assistant Iris miniseries actually coincide with the first story arc in the Executive Assistant Assassin series. It involves all of these women teaming up to go after Rose and the mysterious benefactor who seems to be employing her.
Iris is now working with a young tech mogul named John Wheeler as he entertains a date on a yacht. When Wheeler and the young lady prepare to head back to his place for some super happy fun time, the limo gets surrounded and shot up by Russian mobsters. Before Iris can find out who sent the hit squad, the cops arrive. It appears that Iris is being brought in for questioning, but in reality she needs to report to her actual employer, Agent Dawson of the CIA. It turns out that Wheeler got his startup money from a Russian mobster named Zvedimir, and even though Wheeler's company has not yet generated a profit, he's been spending like it has. Before Iris can investigate any further, she receives a sudden visit from Lily, who explains what the other executive assistants are up to. Iris reveals that she's already learned who is behind Valone. It's a man named Mazutsu, and she's used a CIA contact to obtain the information. However, the revelation that Iris is working with the CIA has really put Lily off.
Again, in the first story arc of Executive Assistant Assassins, it followed Lily getting befriended by a CIA agent who helped her kick heroin before unfortunately being killed. So it's kind of a sore spot for her.
Unfortunately, the argument with Lily ends up distracting Iris long enough for Zvedimir to abduct Wheeler via his new executive assistant, Rose. Iris and Rose begin fighting, with Rose essentially leading Iris to the Bronx Zoo, where it turns out Zvedimir is holding Wheeler hostage. He then orders another executive assistant named Jasmine to square off with Iris, and while the two ladies are fighting, 2 gunshots go off. However, it turns out the 2 gunshots are not from Zedimir's gun, but rather from Iris attacking the water tank in the reptile house. With Iris threatening to use him as alligator chow, Zvedimir gives up as the police arrive.
No, I have no idea where exactly Iris got that gun that she used to blast open the reptile tank and free Wheeler.
The good news is Wheeler is willing to testify against Zvedimir, so it looks like he'll be in custody for a while. It's then that Iris meets up with Agent Dawson, who's got some bad news. Rose is headed back to India to work with Mazutsu because that's her real employer. However, it turns out Mazutsu has several high contacts in the CIA, so Iris can't go after him. Officially. Unofficially, on the other hand, if Iris just happened to accompany this important weapons shipment to India, anything she did on her downtime would be off of CIA books.
Okay, so once again, this is where we get some major overlap with the Executive Assistant Assassins ongoing series. In that introductory arc, Rose wound up taking on a little group of executive assistants led by Lily, as well as members Orchid, Rose, Lotus, and Aster. There were a couple other ones, but their names kind of escape me. Anyway, Iris eventually arrived to intervene, taking Rose hostage and attempting to torture her to get more information on her employer, who was a man named Mazutsu. Mazutsu also turned out to be Valone's mysterious benefactor. Unfortunately, another unnamed executive assistant broke in and freed Rose in a whole puff of smoke. Iris went back to the United States while the others went after Rose. Unfortunately, that led to a confrontation in which Mizutsu killed Lily.
When Iris touches back down in the States, the CIA takes her into custody where the deputy director orders her to stick with Wheeler and not deal with Mizutsu at all. If she deviates from this plan, she will be shot on sight. Agent Dawson then drops Iris off at the hotel where Wheeler is being held at. The piece is short-lived as someone takes out the guards and Iris is forced to make Wheeler sit in the bathroom and hide as she takes down two hitmen, only to suddenly be jumped by Jupiter. It's only through the arrival of Agent Dawson that Juniper is scared off with Iris giving pursuit. The chase leads into the Lincoln Tunnel where the two women eventually wind up squaring off on top of a van. Iris manages to quite literally take Jasmine down and then turn her over to the authorities. No real rest for Iris, though, as Lotus and the other executive assistants inform her about what happened with Lily. So now they must gear up with one final showdown. However, that must also include enlisting some additional help. Rose. The others aren't happy, but Lily should have been strong enough to take down Mizutsu, and didn't, so they're going to need all the help they can get. The next day in Tokyo, the girls implement a plan by taking out a helicopter Mizutsu was planning to use. He goes into lockdown as his private guards are taken out one by one. Finally, Rose manages to clear a path to Mizutsu, but he drops a grenade which takes out Ivy and starts his escape. However, Rose manages to confront Mizutsu in his office and throws a knife into his chest. Now that Mizutsu's dead, the deal is off, and Rose attempts to kill Iris, only for Iris to get her sword up just in the nick of time and kill Rose. A few days later, the surviving executive assistants say goodbye to their fallen comrades, even Rose, and then split up until the time when they need to be called upon again.
Iris would go on to a few more adventures here and there, but for now we've reached the end, or at least the end of her first omnibus. How was it? Well, for the most part, the story is cliched, at least the first one was, but I think it's still pretty well told. Iris definitely feels like a much more well-rounded character than any of the other executive assistants, even Lily. I thought if you recall my executive assistant assassins review, they were just really bland and otherwise forgettable with me confusing several of them. And while there is quite a bit of Cheesecake art in this, I don't think it's nearly as bad as it was in executive assistant assassins either. Also, yes, I am aware that it's really hard to say executive assistant a whole bunch of times. Now, again, going back to the Cheesecake art, there is a detraction to it. Again, there are several just wannabe porn shots in here. And again, I kind of said it a couple times already. And I guess if I need to elaborate a little bit on it, this is clearly not a book intended for young readers. It wouldn't ever be given to kids, I don't think, especially given some of the cover art. So, you know, I don't know if this is a full-on mature reader's book, but in all likelihood it is. I mean, there's a lot of swearing and graphic violence in it, so why not just go out and do the nudity as well? Like, you're not filming a movie or TV show. You don't have to worry about an actress with a no nudity clause. You know, just, have fun. I mean, I don't know how much better it would make it, but again, if you're going to do it, why not just do it? Likewise, I would say a lot of the supporting cast, especially in the later miniseries, is really flat and underdeveloped. I mean, it's kind of weird that Akatea and Diane Coverdale are so dominant in the first part of their miniseries, but of the second Iris miniseries, I should say, but they don't feel that important. They just seem to constantly be spinning their wheels. And Villone is just another power-hungry villain, and Mizutsu doesn't really do anything in the third series. He obviously does a bit more in Executive Assistant Assassins, but yeah, they're definitely just kind of forgettable and uninteresting. And like I said, again, why is the second Executive Assistant Iris miniseries not really featuring a lot of Iris until the second to last issue of the book? It just doesn't really make any sense. And like I said, overall, this is better than Executive Assistant Assassins, but it's not that much better. I'm going to give the Executive Assistant Iris Omnibus Volume 1 a D. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
help support my channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions. There, you can request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember, like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.